Well, good afternoon and welcome to this SEEP webinar. My name is Nathan Kirkpatrick. I am the Managing Director of Alban at Duke Divinity School in Durham, North Carolina. I also have the privilege of being a priest associate at the Church of the Advocate in Chapel Hill. Our discussion this afternoon includes 5 people who, if you are a regular attendee at SEEP webinars, have now become familiar faces to you. We're checking in again today with Doyt Conn at Epiphany in Seattle, Matt Hyde at Heavenly Rest in New York, Russ Levenson at St. Martin's in Houston, Noelle York-Simmons at Historic Christ Church in Alexandria, Virginia, and Dr. Eleanor Bergquist, who's the Senior Advisor for the U.S. COVID-19 response team at Vital Strategies, former faculty member at St. Louis University. It's good to see all of you back. We will begin with some updates, hearing how you have been since the last time this group was together. One of the major changes that's happened since the last time this group came together is that 3 of our congregations represented have begun limited in-person gatherings, and we want to hear a bit about that. But in this conversation, we want to hear what they're learning as they're trying to shepherd hybrid congregations with an in-person presence and a virtual presence. We also want to hear how they're thinking about Advent and Christmas and the traditional stewardship season. We have a lot to talk about. We'll see where the conversation takes us, but we do want to begin with updates. Let's start in New York. Matt Hyde, who's moderated this panel in the past, is now joining it. Matt, since this group was last together, what's different now at Heavenly Rest?
Well, first, it's nice to be back together, and thanks to Nathan for moderating. Well, we've been on a journey this summer, like everybody else, and trying to find where we are as a community and to stay together as a church and to stay safe. And so we have, in the last couple of weeks, begun again in-person worship, which we're thinking about as part of an expanded community, which is both online and in person. And we've always been a neighborhood church, and now we have people joining our neighborhood from all over, as most of us do. And so we're trying to navigate that new world. It's every passage represents an incredible emotional chapter. You know, we had not celebrated the Eucharist together for 6 months, and to do that together again was a major moment in our lives together. To be together again has been wonderful, and to do it, we weren't. I think, as we talked about, we weren't on the curve at all in terms of online ministry, and we've begun to navigate that over these last 6 months. And so it's the first time we'd ever live stream the service from our church, and so one of the joys of the moment is being able to learn together.
Thanks, Matt. Let's stay on the East Coast. Noelle, let's check in with you. Last Sunday, I think, was supposed to be your first in-person liturgy. Is that right?
It was our second. And we,
okay.
The Diocese of Virginia is practicing great and appropriate caution in with the bishop's permission to do on in-person services. And so we've had permission to do outdoor services for the last few weeks, and the last 2 Sundays we have tackled Sunday morning prayer in the churchyard. And it was delightfully oversubscribed with we're doing an online registration to make sure we can do contact tracing, very simple Google form that people can fill out. Making sure that there's space for people to walk up if we have newcomers or non-internet users, small handful of those. So we did last week and this week, and we've had great turnout to both of them. There's a lot of honor system going on. People are required to mask, and we haven't had to police it. People are required to stay apart from their neighbors, and we haven't had to remind them. Bring your own chair. Remember to wear your sneakers because the churchyard always gets muddy. I mean, it's sort of that sort of vibe that we have, and it's working because, as we all know, people are just so excited to be back together again. It's a different feeling because we only see this much of anyone's face, and it's hard to have some of those conversations that we want to have. You know, well, have you been? But I think that the feeling of coming back together has been wonderful. We are in October exploring as we go forward baptisms. We have We have a deep waiting baptism list, and we're going to be exploring how we can do infant baptisms, but keep distance between family and celebrant. And then we will have our first Eucharist, again, outdoors in the middle of October at one of these Sunday morning outdoor services. We also have really kind of embraced online worship, and will continue to do it as far into the future as I can see. Whether we are fully back in our church on Sunday morning at some point, when we are fully back in the church on Sunday morning at some point, we'll still have that online presence. The coffee hour that we do in Zoom on Sunday morning has become the mainstay of the church's social time. And we're seeing lots of people there, and people that are going out into breakout groups and making phone dates later in the day and checking in on each other in that space weekly. So that'll be something that we keep until we can have coffee hour with actual coffee with actual people. So that's where we are. I mean, it's been a tough season. We're coming up on 7 months. One of the things that we will be struggling with is that balance of when we can be inside the church and whether or not that coincides with the weather that drives us out of the churchyard. And in Virginia, who knows? That could be January. That could be next week. Who knows? So we're figuring that out and doing kind of a month-to-month planning process, which is hard.
Thanks. We'll get into more of this in a minute, but first let's head west to Texas. Russ, you've had a couple of Sundays of Eucharist in person. What's the reaction then?
Yeah, we tried in June for 3 weeks, and then the spike hit, and so we immediately shut back down, and we have been the whole summer. So we're now about to have our third Sunday of in-person. We started with a cap of 50, and we try to maintain about 10% of the worship space. So, and then we moved to 125 for the last 2 weeks, and then we'll have 125 this week, and then we'll, if you know, people still want to make more than that, we'll move to 2 services. We began offering 2 5:30 p.m. Eucharist during the week on Tuesday, Thursday, and we limit that to about 25. And there's enough space where we can all kind of be apart. And then we continue all the virtual stuff. I'll agree with it, what Noelle and Matt have said. I mean, that was all new to us, and so we weren't doing any of that, and now we will not ever not do that. I mean, it's now become part of our life. We're now doing a lot of virtual fellowship groups, Zooms, Christian education, and we do nightly Compline Monday through Saturday night right now at 8 p.m. It's a live Zoom, and each of the clergy take a turn, and so it's kind of a neat connecting moment. Like Noelle, I'll say we've got a backup of baptisms. My associate for family ministry, after we kind of, sadly, I mean, we've had over 30 deaths during COVID, just in general, and all gravesides. So we have our first memorial service coming up. And then one of my associates, great young man, said, well, by the way, we're holding on. We got 42 baptisms in the queue. So we agreed last week we're going to fire up the font, and we're just going to start doing. We've got baptisms scheduled on Saturdays from now till December, and try to get all those done. So and much the same way, using the same kinds of precautions. We did have our first wedding, and knowing that most of the people who are tuning into this moment are clergy, that has been our biggest liturgical challenge of the whole experience, because you're dealing with lots of people who aren't used to the way we do things. And I think in my 30 years of ministry, I use the word no more times than I ever have, because we were very firm around the parameters, and we were immovable. And then once it was all done, it was actually a beautiful service, but it was very hard to kind of accomplish with 75 people is what we allowed, and attendance that weren't members and things like that. But we got it done, and so that's kind of what we're doing. I will say, and I'm sure everybody's experiencing this, particularly from folks who maybe don't have virtual worship at their church. We are having people tune in from all over. So I mean, and when I say all over, I mean like all over the world. We get greetings in the morning from Africa and Western Europe, and not a lot, but we're starting to hear from people who don't have a church community. So,
thanks. Doyt, let's stop in Seattle.
Things in Seattle are going well. This is an incredibly busy, wildly exciting time to be doing church. As we look at it and think about it here at Epiphany, we always remind ourselves there's no precedent for this. And so within the life of our staff and our lead volunteers, we always think about being really nimble, trying things. If things don't work, try different things. There's nothing wrong with trying new things right now. We've had outdoor church for a while, where we've moved indoors now. We're going to 2 services on Sunday morning, plus we do a pre-record service that airs Sunday morning, plus we do morning prayer every day, plus we do 3 evensongs online a week, right? One of the things that we have committed to the parish is we will work harder than we have ever worked before as a church ever, because I'm acutely aware of the fact that we are writing the history of Epiphany Parish during the time of the pandemic as we go. And so our congregation, irrespective of how involved they are right now, will look back and wonder how their church was active and relevant in a time of profound crisis. Did we have a voice? Were we using it? Were we inviting people to a thing that they needed? So what we've said to the congregation is we will do so many things. We will have multiple education on multiple levels every single week, many, many worship opportunities throughout the week, and you carefully choose what you need to nourish your soul. Because that's what needs to happen. As you all know, there's a cacophony of sound out there. Every institution, sort of out of the fear of going out of business or being irrelevant, is bombarding our congregants. And so how do we gain their ear and offer them what they need in this time of high anxiety? So we're doing the services, we're doing a lot of classes, we do weddings and funerals as you are down there, Russ. But those are, and I can talk more later about communication and stuff, but just really laying out a broad array of things, both in person and online, most online. One of the new things we're trying is Zoom Church. We're putting together communities that then watch our service, our live stream service, and so they can have the church experience via Zoom, but not in isolation. So we're doing these little Zoom communities. And I haven't yet done this, but I'm going to add on sermon questions that they can then discuss after the service is over. So that's one innovative, not all that innovative, but that's something we're trying at Epiphany. So that's maybe a little general overview of how we're thinking about how we are at this time. But it's as busy by far as it's ever been for me at Epiphany Parish. And it's exciting to try to figure out what God's laying up for us and how we connect with people who can't necessarily be here on Sunday morning.
Thanks, Roy. Let's swing back to the Midwest. Dr. Bergquist, how have you been since we've last been together? How's your work been?
I'm good. My work is very, very busy. And I think my overall thoughts are maybe that we're moving. So in the title of this, I think the title of this webinar is very apt. And I think we're moving from one way to think about it to another. So I think we're moving from the what now idea to what now? That sort of prescriptive panic phase where we think we're going to get a lot of guidance from the federal government and from elsewhere. And I think we've maybe moved past that a little and realized we're going to get some guidance. We have gotten some, but there's been a lot of wiffle waffling, and there's been a lot of disagreement and confusion among citizens and among parish members. And I'm talking about the pandemic and what we do and what we don't do and what's okay and what's not okay. And so I think we're moving into a space where what I would call and I don't know if this is true, right? So you get what you pay for, right? And so since my advice is, or my thoughts are free, you get what you pay for. But I think we're moving into what I'd call a social contract or a moral compass phase, right? Where we maybe have a little bit less guidance from the government as we move through the election season, as we move into flu season, unfortunately. And I think that the church will have an even bigger role that you even have had before in helping people, guide people towards the smart decisions for their emotional lives, for their physical lives, for their health lives, and their spiritual lives. So I think that as big of a role as you have had, I'm actually imagining an even bigger role for you this fall.
Well, thank you. And we'll come back and touch on all of that, is how we think about the fall and winter and how we think about Advent and Christmas. But thanks for sort of prompting the question and teeing it up for later. I'm curious to think about the strategic questions that each of you are wrestling with right now, whether that's a question in your own life and work, or that's a strategic question your congregation or institution is wrestling with. Doyt, why don't we start with you? What are those kinds of strategic questions you're asking?
So the question we're asking and wrestling with, there are two. The first is, we understand the deep value of incarnational worship. We get it, right? We can all explain how it works as community, what it does for the edification and nourishment of our souls, right? So we understand that and we can articulate that. And within my team here, we talk a lot about, is it possible to translate that online? Right, and there's that whole thing, can you worship can you bless the sacrament online or whatever? That's not the question we're asking particularly, because I believe that theology always follows practice. So whatever practice finds its way into life out there, the theology will follow. So you can argue about that all you want, but the reality is the theology is going to follow it. The question is it edifying for someone to take the sacrament from their home as it's blessed online or participate in the Eucharist online? That's the question. And the manner by which that happens in the room cannot happen over online, so it has to happen differently. So we're asking ourselves, what are we doing with our AV system, with our mics, with our audiovisual, with the manner by which we gather people together online to help facilitate that? Because I believe at the core of my being, if God has given us the capacity to stream the Eucharist online, then God has given us the capacity to translate somehow what edifies in the room to edifying somebody in their home. So I believe that, but I don't know how to do it. So that's the one core question. The second core question we're looking at is this whole idea, and I've talked about it, I think, on this webinar before, the hyperlocality. I believe we have to endure 24 months. And when we endure 24 months, God willing, and hopefully thrive to the extent to which we can, there will be a massive blossoming with our relationship with our neighbor and our community. So the surviving Episcopal churches are the ones that did a pretty good job thriving here and were able to maintain themselves, will blow out in about 24 months. So we think about how we are preparing for that and how we're laying the groundwork to be all things to all people who are considering coming to this Episcopal parish with the sort of the Episcopal brand. But on the other hand, we're also talking about universal connectivity. In the large body of Christ, which is now a worldwide entity, though it was before, now it is even more so because people are, my mom watches my service every Sunday and goes to her service and then probably goes to Russ's church. I don't know, she hasn't told me. The point is, before they weren't doing that, because in the same amount of time she could do 3 services, she was just going to her church and coming home. So we're thinking about what's our role up there, sort of what's our niche role in this larger body of Christ. So those are the two things we're thinking about: incarnational worship and how that goes out over the internet, and the hyperlocality and the universal connectivity.
Great questions. Russ, what questions are you asking in Houston?
Well, first of all, I've noticed that Doyt has a fire going in his fireplace, and that alone tells me that miracles are alive and well, because I've got my air conditioner blowing here in Houston. So
it's sort of chilly. My office is the coldest place in Christendom. I don't know. It's unbelievable.
Well, it's interesting. We were launching about a 5 to 10 year strategic plan January a year ago. So before before all this started, driven in part by the fact that we just finished a capital campaign. We were in the middle of a building project that will be finished actually Palm Sunday weekend. Michael Curry's coming. He's actually scheduled to come do the dedication. We've already moved it, and with hope, we're trying to do something on Palm Sunday weekend. We'll see if that works or not. And so really that all just paused because now we're asking the kinds of questions that you're asking. What does it look like when all this is over? I absolutely agree with Doyt that when this is over, there's going to be a huge resurgence and a huge opportunity to reintroduce ourselves to our communities, to our world, and so in our virtual clergy meeting last week, I just invited our team. I said, please, let's start thinking now. How do we reintroduce ourselves to the city of Houston? We have people know us. They know where we are. They know the kinds of things we've done in the past. Mercifully, we will have gotten through this building project and have, some of the physical plant's going to draw some of that. But so I've asked us to spend the next 2 or 3 months talking about that reintroduction. What does that look like for our discipleship ministries, for our outreach ministries, our engagement in the community? We're gonna. For years we've been the Right One church on the corner, and we now do a Right Two, we now do a Right Three, but now we're also exploring some contemplative stuff that we've never done before, and much the same way Doyt just said. I'm saying let's not put anything off the table. Everything's on the table. If things don't work, then we won't do those. But let's start by the possibility that the blessing of this time gives us a little bit more time and space to think about who we might be. And when those doors open, I'm hearing all the time how hungry people are to be back in church. And I think that that'll be a mighty feast when we come back together. So.
Well, I think the Pew study supports that. 96% of regular attendees said that they would be back in person at the point they felt it was safe to do it. So, that's hope for that. As a colleague of mine says, when we all get back, we'll all be newcomers again together, which I appreciate. Matt, how about you? What are the strategic questions you're asking in New York?
Well, we understand ourselves as both storytellers and organizers. We're community organizers and believe the Spirit organizes us. Like Russ, we had just finished a strategy process. We'd done storytelling with each other for a year, and so we're pretty clear on what our DNA was and where we were called. And then in the middle of the pandemic, trying to figure out how we live that in a new environment. And so we spent part of the summer really trying to understand, having gotten through the first number of months of the pandemic, what our next year or so would be like. And do understand what we're doing as an expanded community, as trying new things, living our DNA in a new environment, which is both online and in person, and both neighborhood and now much more broadly, and looking at 3 things that we've taken on. One is pastoral care, which is really the foundation of our ministry in any season, and how we care for each other, how we offer continuity in a time of disruption and discontinuity, how we're using spiritual practice to anchor and lift our congregation. People both need grounding and hope, and so how are we working on that? And then there's a real passion in our community for the city, and so how are we serving in as a partner in reimagining New York? Because we're talking about our institutions and our church communities, but at least in New York, the wider city's got to reimagine too. It's moving forward, not back, and in a significantly different place than it was before March. And so we want to be a partner in that. So care, anchor, serve is the focus for what we're doing.
Thanks, Matt. Noelle, what about y'all?
So I'm loving hearing all this, because we're in a very different place at Christ Church. And one of the things, and part of that is situational. Two of my two clergy colleagues just moved on to new positions in the last 2 months, which is really exciting for them and a lot for the parish. But we also, as a staff, have found ourselves tired. We're wrung out. We have been, building an airplane out of banana peels and mailboxes for the last 6 months. And we're entering into the time of year that is the most full time of year in a normal year. And we're finding ourselves tired. And so we decided as a staff and as a vestry, we decided that what we're actually going to do is scale back. So instead of doing 47 services a week, we're actually focusing most on what we are the best at. And we're looking and saying, like, what do we have to offer within the parameters of what we have available? And what can we do really, really well and make really, really compelling? And then let's do that. And let's put our weight behind learning how to do that. And what that has meant for the short term is that we can have a smaller, intense body of things that we can, like I said, that we can do really well, but that when things change, which as we know is about once a month right now, we don't have to change quite so much. It's not quite as much of an earthquake underneath sort of our staff and limited number of volunteers. And so we can say, okay, so this worship schedule, this limited worship schedule is just going to shift this much instead of sort of a giant shift that we have to do again, just like we did last month and just like we did the month before that. It has settled the staff down. It's focused us. It's made us so much happier because we're doing the things we love to do and not doing the things that are all the tasks and all the little bits and pieces all over the place. And it also means we're not trying to accomplish things just because they're on last year's checklist, but we're doing them because they have meaning, and we're doing them because they really speak to the people in our congregation that have been showing up. We too have been calling on, we've actually already been figuring out ways of engaging our local community. Alexandria is a much smaller city than you all live in. But we've been figuring out ways of engaging, particularly our local leadership. So in our what we call coffee hour, which is our Zoom meeting after church, we're having local leaders come in and talk about their faith lives and their civic engagement. And, how did you come from a faith background and end up on city council? What does that mean for you? Those sort of questions. And by doing that, we're sustaining those connections that this parish has had with this little city for a quarter of a millennium, I guess. I don't know, century, whatever we are. And that's been important to our congregation to sustain those relationships. Our congregation is also a hub for some of the social service, social justice work that's been going on in Alexandria. So we have been a place of connectivity for a long time. But other parishes are looking to us to figure out how to do financial assistance when people can't come to the door, and how to do a food pantry if people can't gather for it. And we're helping train up other congregations on how to do that. So that's another piece of that connectivity, but also figuring out how to serve the folks that seem to be most deeply affected financially by what's going on. Because of all of that, we haven't done a whole lot of long-range planning. It doesn't feel particularly pointful right now. It doesn't feel like it's going to make a whole lot of sense to make a long-range plan for a parish when we don't even know what it's going to look like in January. However, we are, because we're in such a heightened political place, both in the environment and physically, we have done some really significant, we've begun some really significant engagement around ideas of racism and anti-racism, which is stuff we can do online. We have 85 people doing Sacred Ground Circles right now because Christ Church is beginning to understand its own history in light of the present in a way that it has never unpacked before. and people are so energized and excited about what we're learning, and it's frightening, but that is laying the groundwork for understanding who we are at present, which is then going to start putting bricks on the path for who we're going to be in the next 5 years or in the next 50 years. It's different than a strategic plan, but it's starting to put words to mission. And that's work that's really exciting. And it's all, we are not in person other than Sunday morning's morning prayer. But doing that scaling back, I joke, we're doing it so that I don't die, but doing that scaling back so that we don't kill ourselves or raise some expectation that we're just not going to be able to sustain, has actually increased both feeling and excitement and engagement in a lot of our congregational members.
Well, there are a number of comments coming into the chat box just of people saying thank you for acknowledging these changes and the need to right-size offerings and to keep adapting to the ongoing situation. So thank you to each of you for sharing your strategic questions and also for helping us think about how do we sustain this for the longer haul. Ellie, you're in a different industry, and yet I imagine you're experiencing some wild changes yourself through this season of pandemic. What are the strategic questions you're up against?
My strategic thinking is probably a little bit more short term than those of you in God's work. My strategic thinking probably extends through 2021, but most of what my strategic thinking is on right now is testing and vaccine. So a lot of my thoughts are on vaccine and whether or not the population understands vaccine efficacy. So like how many people are still going to be vaccine hesitant and they don't want to get it because they feel it's rushed? How many people are going to basically be shoving people out of line in order to get it? And then just in terms of that, for this group, one thing that I would hope and stress that everybody understands is that whenever we get the vaccine, and if people get vaccinated, we'll still need, the vaccine is not a panacea. It's such an important tool in our arsenal, and we're not going to be able to do this without it. But we still need to maintain distance. We might need to keep with the masking because the vaccine will only be 50, 60, I don't know what percent effective, but not that effective. So, you know, if it's 50%, if it has a 50% efficacy, that means that the, 1 out of 2 people could still either get sick or transmit. So it's just one of the things I think about in terms of the horizon and what we're doing and what we think we're doing in 2021. As we, my big reach, my brass ring is herd immunity. So once we get there, things are great. But the process of getting there, I think, is a little bit messier than people think it is.
That's really helpful. And we do want to shift the conversation in some ways. As we start thinking, many of you have pointed to, it's hard to imagine 2021 or let alone 2022, but thinking about the fall and winter, and we hear so many predictions about what fall and winter will be like. Dr. Bergquist, I want to come back to you and sort of pick up on this thread that you've already named a number of times about how you see churches being really instrumental in this season. What would you hope we do in the fall and in the winter?
I mean, I know it's not really usually your place, but I certainly hope you would encourage everybody to get a flu vaccine because those are known and those are safe, and that will help your congregations in a huge way as we get to what I like to call this mashup of, like, Godzilla versus King Kong. It's going to be like COVID versus flu this winter as they come together and sort of fight against us. So if we can knock one of them out, at least that will be being flu. If we can knock out flu, that'll be helpful. But the way that I think that you can help from a spiritual perspective is helping people make the choices that will keep themselves, their families, and your congregation safe. I think that we're going to move into a space where we know less about the pandemic. So there's something called antigen testing, which are point of care tests. And there's a lot of waffling at the state right now about how to get those tests reported. this seems like inside baseball, but it's important when you think about the positivity rates, which is something that public health has now taught the public to pay attention to. And the positivity rates are going to change. Those are based on PCR tests. And so if we are mostly getting antigen tests and not really getting those PCR tests, all the numbers and all the things that you've been taught to watch over the last 6 months, they change. And maybe they're less influential because just not that many people are getting those PCR tests. So the point behind all this is that people are going to need to make kind of uninformed decisions about their lives and their health. And so what I'd like to see is the church come in with that information. So the information that you provide is do what you feel is safe. Protect your families, make good decisions, make those safe decisions that you would have been making in April, May. Even though you don't have the information or it seems like it's getting better, still hold yourself and your community and your congregation in a protective stance. Because the information that is going to be coming to you, through those state dashboards and everything that I was talking about in March, that's sort of changing now. And so it's not that it's less reliable, it just means something different. And so I think we can start to rely more on our internal moral compasses. And that's where you come in. So you're going to have more influence. I'd like you to have more influence about people making those decisions than relying on the CDC website or the federal government, et cetera.
Thanks. We have a question from Michelle to you, Dr. Bergquist, about herd immunity. What does it look like with a 50% efficacy vaccine and 35 to 40% of the population stating that they have no intention to receive it? Can you say a little bit more about what you're hoping for in that herd immunity?
Sure. Well, so we don't know what number of people will get us to herd immunity, right? So like total immunity is of course 100%. So what is herd immunity? Will it be 60%? Will it be 70%? So I don't really know. It's that amount of people that we need in order to either A, have gotten COVID and recovered and then have antibodies, hopefully those last, and B, have gotten the vaccine. So there will be some people who have antibodies. So we'd love for those people to also get vaccinated, but they will add to herd immunity, right? So it's an additive effect. Just like everything in the pandemic, it's a layered effect, just like masks go on top of social distancing, which goes on top of vaccine, which goes on top of hand washing, et cetera. So I think, to be honest, I think when the vaccine comes, I think most people will want to get it. I think there will be a lot of vaccine hesitancy, but I think that we'll have many candidates, and it'll almost be, that will be the problem, is choosing which vaccine. Maybe you're going to wait for the studies, maybe you're not, maybe you're a first responder. Not everybody will be able to have it to begin. So you'll be getting questions, you guys will probably be getting questions about, should I get this, what should I do? Because people will feel that uncertainty. There's like, a turbidity in the water about what to do with their lives and their health, and it's a stressful situation. So I can see these questions coming your way, even though you might not feel like you're in a position to answer them. So education is important for you in your jobs about when the vaccine comes. So the herd immunity question is a tough one. The other thing that I would point out, which is very stressful, is that we don't have any data on kids yet. So the vaccine trials, they haven't even started for children yet. So all of this vaccine, everything that we're talking about, this is for adults. This is for older populations and anybody over 16 or 18. So there's another question for you and your congregations. We won't reach herd immunity for everybody, probably until the fall at least. Because if you're not immunizing the kids, they don't get as sick, but they can definitely still spread it. I'm sorry to give it not a super precise answer. There just isn't a super precise answer.
No, that's really helpful. A lot of people are asking questions about the science here. Can you help us understand sort of the best, latest research about the risks of being indoors versus outdoors? What should congregations consider as they're attempting to have a group of people indoors for, let's say, a 60-minute liturgy?
Sure, and I'd like to address something that's in the comments. So I would never say don't rely on the science. definitely rely on the science. What I'm saying is that the reporting and the numbers that you're being told might not necessarily be the science. So that's different than like the JAMA, you know, the Journal of American Medical Association or the Lancet, those journals, that's the science, which is different than the presentation of data. And that is a whole nother webinar. So Nathan, can you just remind me of the question one more time?
Sure, thinking about indoors, outdoors.
Oh, indoor, outdoor, sure.
Yeah.
What's interesting here is this gets more complicated for Doyt, Noelle, and Matt, and less complicated for Russ. So as we, in the Northern Hemisphere, move into in the north part of the country, we're all in the Northern Hemisphere, but in the north part of the country, as we move into those really cold, icy days when people want to stay inside, there is increased transmission. So there was recently a study that showed that there was increased risk with people who had eaten in a restaurant, right? So not just indoors, but indoors with your mask off and putting food in your mouth. That bodes well for churches. If you're not going to take your mask off and not have the coffee hour, that bodes well for you all indoors. So there's several things there. Indoors is definitely not as safe as outdoors, for sure. As much as you can, stay outside and prepare for the weather. Right? So in those Nordic countries where there's no bad weather, there's just inappropriate clothing, right? As Noelle said about having the shoes on for the muddiness. If you can sort of shore up people's outdoor capabilities and environmental outdoorsiness, that will benefit your congregations. If you have to go indoors, you're in a good place that you're not necessarily removing your masks for singing and eating and all of the things, but certainly you're much safer outdoors. And that's known now.
That's really helpful. Dee Dee has a suggestion about churches hosting flu shot clinics, and if that's possible. There's also a story on Faith and Leadership. Some of you know that magazine, about a church that's hosting COVID-19 testing. So there are some new ways that churches can partner with the medical community in their own area. Let's go back to Noelle's marker of a month and planning sort of a month at a time. In the next month, we have an election coming. We also have the start of stewardship season in many congregations. I'm curious how you all are planning those things. Noelle, I want to start with you, especially given your comment about the anti-racist work and anti-racism work that your congregation is doing right now. Knowing how delicate those conversations can be even in person, how have you translated that to online, and how are you thinking about the election and into stewardship season?
Okay, so wait, you want me to do anti-racism, the election, and stewardship season?
Just all of it, yes.
Okay. The anti-racism thing, and that sort of like Eleanor said again, that's a whole separate seminar. There's a lot for Christ Church in undertaking this work, as I know there is for a lot of us. And we're doing Sacred Ground circles in Zoom, and those are going actually really, really well because people have more flexibility to show up. In the greater DC area, the excuse is always traffic, but guess what? No excuses, no traffic. Off practice, so we're not having to worry about bumping into children's sports and that sort of thing. So they're just happening, and we're doing the best we can with the tools that we have. I was having conversations with colleagues over the last couple of days about what folks in this area are doing about the election coming up. I'm aware that in the Episcopal Church, the very best tool we always have at our disposal is liturgy, the thing that we're best at. We're better than, we're very good at it. It's not what I meant. We're not better than anybody. We're very good at it. And we are at Christ Church, we haven't exactly figured out how we're going to slice that pie, but we're going to be leaning into our liturgy in the sort of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of the election week, understanding that right after it, on the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we don't know what it's going to look like in this area. We don't know if we're going to have an elected president by that point. We don't know. There's a lot of unknowns. So we're trying to figure out how we're going to lean into a liturgy that still might not allow us in the building. if there's a way to vigil outdoors, if there's a way that we can do something that is sustained, that allows for anyone of any party to come and pray for whatever it is they feel like they need in those days, before and after, without judgment. So that's a really super vague answer to what are we doing about the election. Following the election fairly shortly, we start talking about the incarnation like we do every single year. And we're going to have a lot of incarnation to be talking about, I think. I think that the themes of Advent are going to look very, very different when we're talking about light in the darkness, when we're talking about God made manifest among us, when we're talking about being accompanied. I think all of those themes are going to look incredibly different and are going to be deeply important in the ways that a lot of the themes of Lent were when we were first entering this time. So, all right, I got one, I got two. Stewardship. All right. Stewardship this year, we actually, right along with the idea of dialing back and doing less, we have had a lot of fun with our annual campaign this year. For example, one of the things that we did, every year we send out a pledge card in an envelope with a letter from me. And it's always stuffed full of a whole bunch of printed materials that have charts, and they're all very beautifully done and really important and lovely. We scrapped all of it. This year they got a letter from me and a pledge card that, instead of a lot of pretty pictures, lovely pictures of beautiful people in our parish, it's blank on one side. And on the flip side, it has the lines to fill in your information, name, pledge, contact, whatever. And we're asking people on the blank side to write something, draw something, give it to your kid to draw something. Tell us what makes you grateful right now. Where do you see God at work in your life right now? And then fill out the pledge card side too, put it back in the envelope and send it back. And we've already had a whole bunch of pledges come back in, and we've had a whole lot of those pledge cards filled in as well. We got some great drawings from kids. We've got some beautiful pieces of scripture, pieces of poetry. I've been really impressed at how well the congregation has taken to this kind of creative exercise. But it's another means of connecting. And then we'll figure out what we're going to do with these cards and how we're going to show them, some sort of Zoom video kind of thing, show the parish all of this that we're grateful for. So we are figuring out ways, and then we're doing all of our call nights are all on Zoom. So we'll meet together and then send people off to their very own cell phones. But the call nights are following up on 3 cycles of all parish calls. You all have done this too, I'm sure. Everyone in the parish got a phone call just to say, hey, are you okay? Are you checking in? How's your pandemic going? And this is another one of those, but it'll be, hey, how are you doing? How's your pandemic going? And have you sent your pledge in yet? So it will be less of a jarring, like, great, you call me once a year to ask for money. We're having a really good time with it. A lot more fun than we anticipated. And that scaling back has actually helped the stewardship committee really enjoy it. We're doing videos, gratitude videos from parishioners, sort of moment of stewardship things that we play right in the announcements before worship, blog pieces, but it's gratitude, 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 which is always true in our stewardship. That's our thing, but we are raising it to the top even more this year. So that was a super broad brush of all of those. I'm happy to answer questions, or we'll just pass it on to the next person. Off you go.
That's great. Thanks, Noelle. Matt, how about you? Looking ahead over the next few months, how are you all planning? What are you imagining?
Well, belonging is the center of who we are. And so we're looking at how we organize ourselves together we're trying small groups for the first time. We're doing exactly what Noelle described in terms of increased focus on individual connections, calls, emails, back and forth to folks. And our stewardship will be part of that. We feel like we're organizing our parish for a new chapter in our mission. And so the invitation of stewardship is to do exactly that. And we hope we've been together through the first 6 months, and it's an invitation to be together through the upcoming year. We're beginning to think about Advent and Christmas really it's important in this moment, I think, to find where the threads of continuity might be. I mean, there has been a feeling of so much loss of what's familiar, and so thinking about what our traditions are, what the foundation of them might be, and what people care about, how we begin to understand how we might do that. People know we're going to do it differently. The question is what it means and how people continue to feel like their history, their memories are honored in that moment. We're continuing, interesting to hear what Noelle's doing around anti-racism work. We've been focused on having this conversation about white supremacy and anti-racism together, reading, praying, listening together. We have a wonderful partnership with Episcopal Divinity School in Kelly Brown Douglas that's been really terrific and transformational for us. And we're looking at ways in which we can join with others in New York to really move our institutional resources towards the things we pray for. And so someone in the business community asked us here, well, who are your vendors? Who do you buy from? And honestly, I hadn't thought a tremendous amount about that. And so now we are, and we're working with other faith communities to see how we can shift towards doing more purchasing from Black and minority vendors in the city, and who have been historically discriminated against and have been the hardest hit in the pandemic. And so trying to find ways where we organize ourselves, but trying to organize with the wider city also.
Thanks, Matt. And Russ, what do the next few months look like in Houston? Oh, wait a minute, you're muted, sorry.
Echo a lot of what I'm already hearing. I mean, lots and lots of planning, lots and lots of flexibility. I think, our folks are really in need of a place to retreat to, and I think our churches really need to be that. We need to, with the conflict that is swirling all around us in the world, to be havens for people to come, whether that's on our grounds or in our churches. I mean, we'll probably, what we're going to do is come up with something similar to what Noelle said around a liturgy for the election day, and we'll just open the church and people will make reservations and can come have quiet time to pray that day, and maybe for the, as Noelle says, maybe for the week that follows or the month that follows or whatever that follows. And I think bouncing back to the church, Ellie, you said something interesting a little while ago. You said for those of you really doing God's business, you're really doing God's business. I suspect all of us are praying a lot more for people like you than we are for our colleagues. And I think one of the things I'm saying back to the church is do all we can to connect with each other, and in every single way. I might have shared this in our last time together. One of my spiritual disciplines during COVID has been, as we all do, we think of names, thousands of names probably in a day. But when I think of a name now, I actually take that as a prompting of the Holy Spirit, and I pick up the phone and I call them. And I have had more deeper, richer, better conversations with members in the last 7 months than I have in my last 13 and a half years. In fact, I will not pick up a phone to make a call unless I look ahead and I've got like 30 minutes to talk, because I don't want to be that guy who goes, I've only got 5 minutes. Because I will say my two greatest concerns, if I can shift a little bit right now, around demographics. One is our seniors who are and have been locked up and locked in and separated, and many of whom can have no visitors. That's just now starting to ease up in Houston, but not a lot. So we're really now thinking, how do we personally be church to them beyond a phone call? But I have a real concern. I mean, we had a suicide of somebody who was 92 just a few weeks ago. And the other is, and I don't know if I'm not sure who's a millennial here. Noelle, you may win. No. So perhaps among our younger adults.
Not by a solid 10 years, but thank you.
Okay, great. I don't consider myself a young anything anymore. I have a real concern from my conversations with teens to young adults, because I'll go to people my age, and when I was 22 or whatever, I was thinking what I'm going to be doing in 5 years. I'm going to get married. I'm going to have kids. I'm going to have my first house. I might go to graduate school. I was able to plan. Whether those plans manifested themselves or not, that's another question. But nobody sat around and really among my peers and went, what am I going to be doing 6 months from now? Will I have a job tomorrow? I mean, in a way that is totally dominating that demographic. And so I have a real concern about young adults and young families, because I suspect many of them can't plan beyond, the end of this year. And how do we stay connected to them in ways? I mean, certainly the phone calls are increasing around issues like family systems, like addiction, like depression. I mean, those are the things that would seem naturally to jump forward, but these things are not going to, as Ellie has pointed out, these aren't going to weigh next week. These are only going to grow deeper, bigger, wider. And so trying to empower the members of the parish to, like I'm saying to Ellie, you are all ministers of God. We need all of you. And those of you who are healthy and vibrant to join us in ministry is really important. So that's part of what we're trying to do. I mean, we're frustrated that we can't do, we have a lot of outreach ministry in the community, whether that be working in partnership with other people, but there's a lot of downtown work. We're not downtown, we're in the suburbs, but a lot of our members are involved in ministry, and that's kind of been stunted, and people are frustrated by that. So trying to find ways to start that back up again, but COVID has really made its way through our homeless population here in Houston, and that has shut down a lot of those kinds of ministries. So.
Thanks, Ross. Doyt.
Well, I spoke earlier about really ramping up things around here and doing a lot of classes and worship and spiritual exercises. We do a lot of the spiritual disciplines, having a fast every Friday, broken with the Eucharist at the end of the day. That has all been oriented toward November 3rd. So all of that planning was to create as many avenues as reprieve or transformation or something in anticipation of the anxiety that I see mounting in our community here. So we have All Saints Sunday, we're doing an All Souls Evensong, then we're doing a vigil in the chapel all the way through election night with a mass at 12 a.m. on the 4th that will live stream to our congregation, and I'll speak at it. So we've oriented all of those classes, not just to do a lot of stuff, but to create many avenues, whatever anybody needs, because there is anxiety around this, certainly in the city of Seattle. Because the church has seen this before and the church has endured. And so we are the steady backdrop against which everything can be thrown and we can hold it. And so we're continually reminding the congregation and the people of Seattle that we are here, we are deeply rooted, and we are prepared to care for you no matter what happens. So that's been the lead up to where we are now. Stewardship this year has been really a lot of fun. We have doubled down on snail mail and increased sort of the look and feel of what we send out, because the volume of things people are getting online is such, like I said earlier, cacophonous noise, that a big, beautiful magazine, we did this big magazine, we called it Life Now in the Age of the Holy Spirit, all color and articles and stuff and all the things. And we did 13,000, online this or that. We had a whole timeline of all the things that have happened in COVID, sort of chronicling up to this point in time, and then followed that up with sort of much the more interesting and colorful outreach from a stewardship point of view than usual. Usually we're pretty pedantic and we just sort of shoot it out and hope somebody sends back a pledge. Because people are like turning off their computer and looking at something this way in a way that maybe they hadn't been as careful around in the past. Also, stewardship, incredibly personal, right? Reaching out to people and talking to people has been an important part of that. Finally, with regards, we're doing sacred ground circles as well. We had been preparing to do that, then COVID hit, then we stalled it, and now we have 11 circles up and running, all on Zoom, very powerful. The congregation is entirely gripped by that, including the vestry. So those are, I can't recommend those enough. With regards to Christmas, I mean, one of the things we're thinking about, or we're already beginning it, is what are we doing online in a way that really includes all of our kids in the pageant, right? Because usually you have a great big pageant like you all do, and you got all these kids and they're wearing costumes and it's all fun and people are engaged. How are we going to do that online? And so we have a team that's working on that, and we're doing a lot of stuff ahead of time because we can, right? You know, having people send in videos, and we're sending out costumes to the kids and they can wear them and then put it all together so they see themselves in the life of the parish, though they can't be here. Christmas Eve, we're going to commit to doing as many services as there are people who want to come. And if it means just keep doing them, we'll just keep doing them, right? You know, that's why I go to the gym. I go to the gym, so I have my liturgical, I'm carrying my liturgical weight, right? So you can keep doing services. And that's what we'll do. And people register, and, you know, the governor has given us great safe measures that we abide by very strictly. So that's how we'll do Christmas Eve service.
Well, thanks to each of you for your wisdom that you have shared. Noelle, on your website, you have this great line where you say these new ways of being together have rough edges or bumps. And I needed that permission. I needed that assurance that as we're finding our way through this season, there will be some rough edges and bumps along the way. But I'm grateful to the 5 of you for being willing to share both your rough edges and your smooth plains, and the places where you're figuring it out, and the places where you still have questions. It's been a gift to be with you all. There's a lot that has transpired in the chat box across this hour. And so we will be saving that, and it will help shape SEEP offerings and webinars again in the future. So if you didn't hear your question answered during this time together, tune in for later SEEP webinars, and you'll find your questions answered. Just as a reminder, next week you'll want to be a part of Tuesday's conversation on planned giving, Wednesday's conversation on singing in the age of COVID, and then Thursdays as the panel talks about a fall stewardship campaign. Again, it's been great to see Ellie, Doyt, Russ, Noelle, and Matt this afternoon, and great to have all of you with us. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.